This week we'll be focusing on trees and tree phylogeny and their evolution.
Nothing. All right. Ow.
Welcome everybody to another lavatory
I need to get
lecture.
back on my workout grind anyway, so that's why one of the reasons I put that in there. I
This
want
week
y'all
we'll
to
be
make it do them,
focusing
even
on
though they're
trees
expensive.
and tree phylogeny and
Now
their
it's hot in here.
evolutionary history. This lecture should not be too, it shouldn't be
What's
too
up, Fall
different from the
Guys?
animal diversity
I do have to pee real quick.
lecture.
Damn, it
You
didn't
are going to
update. I
be
thought it
looking at
updated last night.
different trees and
It
using
shouldn't take that
field
long though,
guides.
for
The only difference is that
it'll
this
be
time
logged in.
I'm not
All
going
right,
to be
bet.
providing the field
Be
guides
right back, Kibo.
only
Sorry, man.
because I feel at this
See
point
you
that you
really soon.
guys are more than capable of finding your own field guides and identifying your own trees. So I'm going to provide an example of one field guide and an application that you can download on your phone so that you can use that to identify different trees. But that's all I'm going to do because I think that by now you should know what you're looking for. But again, it shouldn't be too different from what we did last time. I hope everybody had a good Labor Day weekend, by the way, and hopefully everybody stayed COVID free. Nobody went into any parties or too many crazy, situations where you could be at risk. And so hopefully you're good and getting ready to do this new laboratory activity. All right, so the goal of systematics. Systematics is basically, it's a method that biologists use. We have different methods. And basically systematics helps us kind of look at the different diversity of life, look at the tree of life, and basically just understand how different species are related to each other. The tree of life helps us basically look at the relationships, look at their phylogeny. Phylogeny, this word right here, phylogeny, wait, phylogeny refers to the relationship between different organisms, and phylogeny helps us see how closely related they are to each other, how distantly related they are to each other, and basically helps us understand how diverse life is on planet Earth. So there's a lot in the evolutionary record that we do not know. We have fossils, for instance, but there is a lot about these fossils that is yet to be uncovered. So there is a lot in the evolutionary history that is missing. So there's a lot of hypotheses in phylogeny as to how closely related some animals are to each other, but we can make an educated guess based on their similarities, based on their physical similarities and their genetic makeup. So phylogeny helps us classify organisms into different groups. So based on these similarities, genetic or physical, we can place them into different groups and just basically say, these two animals belong in this group because of X, right? This can also include organisms who have lived in the past. And just basically, it gives us a way to classify life and understand just how closely we are to each other, this interrelatedness, how close we are in the tree of life, how distant we are from each other. For instance, like whales are actually more similar to humans than dogs are, which is pretty crazy because whales live in the ocean, but their genetic makeup, the fact that they're mammals and that dogs are mammals too, but like their genetic makeup basically helps us see that whales are more closely related to us than dogs are. There's a few common terms going on right here. There's taxonomy, which basically is just a term for naming and classifying life, and phylogenetics, to allow us to see how different groups or taxa, how closely related these different taxa are to each other, and understand the mechanism of evolution. Evolution is a very complex mechanism. It is very it's a very complex. Not only is it a complex theory, but evolution happens in a very complicated way, and mostly it happens by accident. How different things, you know, why different animals are what they are now, a lot of that has had to do with the different environments in which these animals have found themselves in, and a lot of it has had to do with accidents, mutations per se. Okay, so last time we talked about the Linnaean classification of naming species, and let's talk about the guy who invented it. This guy is Carl Linnaeus. This guy was a botanist. His family, he came from a family of farmers, but his father knew Latin, so his father taught him Latin, and basically the Latin language helped him help him later in life to come up with a new system of classifying species. He decided that it was necessary to come up with this new system of classifying species because at the time there were a lot of plants that were being discovered. Because he was a botanist, he mostly focused on plants. And at the time, there were a lot of different plants that were being discovered. They had different names. If you went to France versus the Netherlands, or you know, different, or the Roman Empire, for instance, if you went to different places, plants had different names. So he just wanted to come up with a system that was common to all. So if you go from one place to the other, the name of the species does not change. And this was particularly important at the time because at the time, new species were getting discovered in the New World, and they were getting moved between the New World and Europe. And so there needed to be some way of organizing things. So he developed binomial nomenclature. And binomial nomenclature, the way this system works, it's super simple, and basically how it works, it's in the name. Binomial. It's a two-name system. So basically, all it uses is the genus of a species and the name of the species. So Homo sapien. Homo being the name of the species and sapiens being our species name. It is a two-part system. It is very simple, and anywhere in the world you say Homo sapiens, you know that means humans. So he published most of his work in a book called Systema Naturae, and all of this means is just systems of nature. Basically, he described this new method of thinking, and it was kind of like a revolution. So it described a new system for classifying plants, and now, fortunately, we have kind of expanded that to classify all organisms on Earth, including, of course, viruses. So it truly was revolutionary. I often show my students this picture of a tomato plant, and the reason why is because on the left, you have what the complicated name that people gave this tomato plant before Linnaeus, and how quickly and simple the Linnaean classification system is. And I like to say the full Latin name just so you know how complicated it was. So bear with me while I say this, but it goes Solanum caule inerve herbaceo folies pinnates incis racemus simplicibus. So this is what you had to say in order to communicate that you were talking about a tomato plant. But after Linnaeum, it became much simpler. It became just Solanum lycopersicum. It was very simple, a two-name system that included the genus and the species. Super simple. Anybody knew what he was talking about, and basically we can apply it to all sorts of organisms on the face of the planet. So here is a picture of the Linnaean classification system. We already went over this last class, but I think it's good that we show it again, just so that you can see a little bit about, just so that you can refresh your memory. We have kingdom, which includes, that's the broad category. Obviously, above kingdom, you have domain. And then you have phylum, class. We went over the different classes of vertebrates last time, from birds to reptiles to what else did we cover? Birds, reptiles, mammals, and then you can go into order, family, genus, and species. So as you go, you get more specific. So from broad to specific, species being the most specific you can get. So there's no group below species. That's just the name of where that organism belongs in. It's the most specific you can get. So there's nothing below that. And so if anybody asks you what is a species, is the most specific group that you can give an organism, the most specific taxa within the Linnaean classification system that you can give an organism. So I'd like to talk a little bit about molecular biology. Molecular biology is a really powerful tool. Without molecular biology, I think science and medicine would be really far behind, because without molecular biology, we wouldn't know the molecular structure of DNA. And DNA is an incredible molecule. It's often surprising to me, why more people are not interested in biology. Like the DNA molecule should be enough to intrigue them into it, because it's the same molecule. All organisms on the face of the planet contain the same molecule. It's the same DNA molecule. So you have the same molecule in your cells that a plant does, or a bacteria has, or a bear, or a lion, or any organism that is living has DNA. It is the same molecule made by the same things. So how come that we all look so different? The answer to that is in the pattern. So if you see these guys right here in the center of the DNA molecule, these guys are bases. So maybe I'll write that here. They are bases. And these bases basically make up a lot of the structure of the DNA molecule. In these bases, they are, your basic nucleic acids: adenosine, cytosine, tyrosine, guanine, right? So I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about these bases throughout your high school career, basic biology, but these are the bases of the DNA molecule. And it is the pattern of these bases that changes from organism to organism. So I would hope that you are listening to the lecture, because I've decided in this moment that I'm going to make this a quiz question, which is, how come all the different organisms on the face of the planet have the same molecule, DNA, but how come we all look so different? The answer is, of course, in the bases. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that you have the base pattern AATTCC, right? This is your pattern, your specific pattern. But your brother or your sister maybe they have an A just like you, but they have a C, and maybe a T. So the DNA molecule doesn't change per se, but it's the pattern of the DNA bases, of these DNA bases, that change. That's why we're all different, because the DNA molecule doesn't change, but again, the pattern of the bases changes. And that's the crazy part. So this is going to be a question on your quiz, so hopefully you are listening intently. Again, these are the bases, and I'm repeating it again for those of you who may be confused or are not sure. This is a T. So these are the bases right here, the bases of the DNA molecule. And these patterns basically helps us understand how closely related we are to each other. So let's go back to this brother and the sibling example. This is you, and this is your this is you, and this is your sibling. I'm just going to write an S. This is you, and this is your sibling. So for the most part, your DNA is very similar, but some of the bases are changed, or they are a little different, and that's why you and your sibling are not the same person. So that's the most simple way, I hope, to describe it. And so these DNA sequences, these patterns in these bases, they allow us to see how closely related we are to each other and to other species. So what is, what percent, I think we share about 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees, but it is that 2%, I'm writing all over this slide, but it's that 2% difference that makes us not chimpanzees, that makes us Homo sapiens. So I hope you remember this, because I think it's important, and it will be on your quiz. So molecular biology has allowed us to see and compare DNA sequences using the DNA molecule. Just going to write DNA here for good measure. Alrighty. So where is DNA in your cells? So DNA contains all of the genetic information your cells need to continue existing, to continue life. DNA is like, it's like the hard drive, right? It's like it has all your information. It has everything that you could possibly need to pass on your genes to the next generation. It has all of the information in the bases, right? So we talk about the nucleotide bases. In these bases, this DNA molecule basically stores its information in just like a noodle, or like, yeah, basically just like a noodle. All of this information gets like really condensed. It gets packed really, really tightly, like this. It gets packed really tightly in these coils, and they get put into a chromosome. A chromosome being where all your DNA is stored. So we have, what is it, 23 chromosomes? Is that right? Am I missing one? 22? Can't remember. I gotta go back, but I think it's 23. Is it? Yeah, it's 23. Anyway, so they get packed into your chromosomes, and essentially these chromosomes get packed into your nucleus of within your cell, right? So all of this DNA gets pretty much stored within the nucleus of your cell, and we'll talk a little bit more about these chromosomes during Lab 10, but it's just important to know that it basically just coils up and it gets packed into your cells, which are in every single tissue within your body. All right, so phylogeny, molecular biology, all of these things, and physical attributes and genetic attributes and DNA sequences basically helped us kind of understand how closely related we are to each other. We're going to be talking about a phylogenetic tree based on physical attributes only, obviously, because we don't have access to DNA sequences, but that's okay. So let's talk a little bit about these 5 organisms. So we have a salmon, a frog, a chicken, a horse, and a cat. And basically they're all very much related to each other in some way, shape, or form. But we have to kind of put them in this phylogenetic tree, and we have to decide which organism went through evolution first, which one basically came into existence first. Let's begin with the salmon. So I think it's, if you think about how life on Earth started in the ocean, right? So it's most probably the salmon is the first organism that is going to go on this graph, mostly because we know that life started in the ocean. So if you have a fish and you have a group of other animals that live on the land, you know right away that the fish came first, right? So the bottom of your tree is the past. And as you move up the tree, you move up the time, you move in time towards the most recent present time, right? So you begin with your salmon, and then legs and arms for walking started to appear. So you know that the frog, because we went over this on our animal diversity, is an amphibian. And these guys were, after insects, were the second group of animals to be able to colonize the land. So they were able to colonize the land, and they developed legs or arms for walking, which was awesome. Obviously, the salmon doesn't have that, so he has to go in the back. And then, if you remember, after frogs came class aves. So the chicken, you know, came after the frog. And also, we know that the chicken, the horse, and the cat, they're all warm-blooded. So that characteristic goes after legs or arms. So anything before this time period does not have warm blood in its system. And then everything that goes up this way has legs or arms for walking and is warm-blooded. I hope that makes sense and it's not getting too complicated. But just remember, like, I think one of the things that is going to help you is going to help you like determine what goes in which category is, which group of organisms, which class of animals came first. And if you remember that the salmon has to go first because he's a fish animal, and then the amphibians, and then the chicken, I think that will help you. The horse and the cat. Now, I'm not really sure which of these came first. They're both mammals, and they both have hair on body. They're both warm-blooded. They have legs or arms for walking, and they give birth to live young. So I am going to say that the horse came first before the cat. This is just a guess, but it could be that the cat came first. Now, a lot of you may want to be as correct as possible with the phylogeny trees that you're going to be making on your tree lab. But, I think as long as you give it your most educated guess and you give me an explanation as to why you think which organism goes where, you're going to get your point. So don't worry too much about like your assignment being 100% accurate. What I care about is that you explain why you put where you put each organism. What's your hypotheses behind it? For the horse, because it's a bigger animal, and because cats, they're kind of like felines, I guess. I'm going to put them last. I could put the cat first, but I think I'm just gonna go with the horse. And so, just as long as you give me an explanation, maybe you're not too sure as to which one came first, but you know that they are closely related to each other because they share similar characteristics. As long as you give me those reasons, then it's gonna be okay. Remember, this is the present time. I just want to write present here so that you don't get confused where the time period starts, and this is the past. Okay, so let's talk about diversity of trees and their traits. Now, trees are perennial. They live longer than 1 year. Some trees can live hundreds of years. It's really depending on their species. They have some trunks have at least 15 feet in width, which is really large. Usually the skinnier the bark or the trunk is, the younger the tree is. If the tree has like a really wide bark, like this, then you kind of know that that tree has lived through a longer period than the one with the skinnier bark, because it has, each year as the tree grows, it goes a layer over its old bark, so it forms a ring. If you guys ever seen a tree cut in half, you're gonna see that there are rings formed around like the center of most trees, and that kind of tells you how many years the tree has lived. The leaves on trees are the site of photosynthesis. Now, you guys probably have heard about photosynthesis before. It seems kind of boring to you, maybe. But I would hope that it's not too boring for you, because photosynthesis is actually really important. We're going to talk a little bit more about photosynthesis and its role in our lives in lab number 9. But photosynthesis is basically the process by which trees make sugar from sunlight. No organism besides bacteria and algae can do that. This ability to make sugar from sunlight and produce oxygen as a byproduct is what allowed the diversity on planet Earth to exist. It allowed life to become possible. Without photosynthesis, none of this would have happened. So if we don't have access to oxygen or to fresh trees, like we would not be able to survive. I'm going to talk about the year 536 in my lecture 9. And the reason why I want to talk about the year 536 is because this seems like a really long time ago. It is a super long time ago, more than 1,000 years. But the year 536 AD, you should look it up. Now everybody's complaining that 2020 is like the worst year ever. We can't do anything. We can't go outside. It's horrible. But the year 536 was the worst year ever because there was plague, there was famine, and all because of volcanic eruptions. So we'll talk a little bit more about that and the role of what happened in that year to trees and plant life. And basically what happens is that when there are no trees, when trees die, when trees and crops die, then we don't have access to food. Not just oxygen is a problem, but like we don't have access to crops. So if trees cannot make sugar from sunlight, they can't produce the fruit and the crops that we eat. And that affects our agriculture. That affects how we live. And people die without, crops and food. So trees come in many shapes and sizes. You can find them in many habitats, in many similar habitats. In Virginia, you're going to find very similar sycamores and oaks and, different birch trees and all these different types. You can identify most of the trees using their leaves. Using their leaves. And some of the characteristics that you may want to look at is their size, the shape of the leaf teeth, which we are going to be talking about, the stalk, the venation. Tree leaves have veins running through them to get like water and nutrients to every part of the leaf, and the leaf arrangement. All right, so let's talk about sycamore trees. Now, sycamore trees I think they're really pretty, but I am biased because I live in a place where somebody must have really liked sycamore trees because they lined up the whole street with sycamore trees. So every time that I wake up in the morning, like all I see are sycamore trees lined up down my street. And you can tell that they are sycamore trees because they have different features that make them very recognizable. So sycamore trees have a very dome-shaped feature to them. So it's very domey. And you also have interesting leaf patterns. So I'm going to switch again to the pen. And basically trees have lobes. And what is a lobe, you asked? A lobe is basically, it kind of comes from the veins of the leaf. And basically it's the point where the vein ends, if that makes sense. So if you start off the vein right here, this is a vein, I hope you can see it. And the vein goes all the way straight through the leaf and it ends at a lobe. So the lobe is where the vein ends. Here's another vein. And it ends at another point. Here's a third vein. A fourth and a fifth. Like, I don't think you can see the fifth, but it's there. So there are 5 lobes to this tree leaf, and this helps me identify, not only do I know that the sycamore tree has a dome shape to it, but I know that there are 5 lobes to each leaf, so that kind of helps guide me in the right direction that this is in fact a sycamore tree. In addition to that, you have this bark. Now, the sycamore bark is kind of cool because it peels off when you touch it. It's kind of like black and white. It has this really cool texture, and I can go outside and just pick at it. But This is one of the essential features of a sycamore tree where the bark really falls off really easily. So that will help you identify a sycamore tree. There are some sycamore trees with huge leaves, like they are like the size of my face. It's crazy, but they belong to the same, you know, family of trees. All right, so what is the difference between a lobe and teeth? Again, remember that a lobe is a part of the leaf that radiates off the central point with a vein running through it, and it's the end point of the vein. So this is the lobe, right? The first lobe of the sycamore tree. Now, if you're looking at the teeth is kind of like this serrated part. So if you took a knife and you went through the leaf and you went like you like continue to chop around the leaf, you're gonna notice this serrated teeth of the leaf. So that's kind of what the teeth refers to. Is just basically the edges of the lobes. How do they look like? Are they serrated? Some trees do not have serrated teeth. Some they just have like a really smooth lobe, but they can have serrated teeth to them. So this is a couple of features that are hopefully going to help you identify the type of tree. Because if you go through a lot of tree identification guides, they are going to ask you, what is the venation? What is the shape of the leaf? Did you notice the arrangement, the margins, the arrangement on the stem? So when you are looking at the trees outside your home, you may want to just like take a lot of pictures so that you know what you're going to be referring back to when you're looking at your tree identification guides. But for the most part, like trees can have a pinnate venation, and this is just basically you have your main vein, and the veins kind of just radiate from this central vein, and they're basically pretty much opposite each other. You can have a parallel venation. Most dicots will have a parallel venation. Maple trees and other different types of trees can have palmate venation, and that this is basically you start off with a central point and it just kind of splits off, like the veins just kind of split off in different directions, and it just really depends on the species of trees. You can also have different shapes to your leaves. The leaf can be linear. In most dicots, they will be linear. I will be talking about a tree that is pinnately lobed. So it has this kind of shape. This pinnately. You can also have palmately lobed, which maple trees also have. Ovate, and all these different types of shapes. So just be able to recognize which one is which, so to help you identify the right type of tree. You want to notice the arrangement as well of the leaves. Sometimes the leaf, if this is the stem, if the stem is right here, sometimes the leaf will come off right off the stem, and that is just a very simple arrangement on a tree. Sometimes they are, pinnately compounded. They kind of have the star shape feature to them. They can be pinnately compounded again, or bipinnately compounded, where they have one central leaf, and then they have other like two stems kind of mirroring each other, and they have leaves coming off these stems and such. You also want to notice the margins, like I told you. Some sycamore trees have a serrated. Again, they have this, like if you like cut the leaf with a knife, you would have this serrated shape to it. They can be an entire margin where there is no serration, crenate, detente, or lobed. The arrangement on the stem can also be something that you notice. So sometimes you have the stem. And an alternate arrangement basically just means that the leaves kind of change positions. If you start off with this leaf, the other one is found a little bit lower than that leaf. And then you have another one. just a little bit lower. They're not directly opposite each other. They kind of alternate positions. You also have opposite, and opposite, they are directly opposite each other. So we talked about bilateral symmetry in the last class. In bilateral symmetry, remember, if you put a mirror down, if you put a line down the middle of your body, your left side kind of reflects your right side. And the same can be said about an opposite arrangement on a leaf. They kind of mirror each other. So that is something to notice. Some trees have whorled arrangement. This can be found in pine trees. This is, very common to pine trees. So this can be something that you can use to help you guide you through which type of tree you're looking at. And most tree identification guides are going to be like this, where they're going to ask you questions like, are the leaves opposite? If they're opposite, go to 2. So you go to 2. Are the leaves simple? If they're simple, go to number 3. Are the leaves lobed? Go to number 4. Are the margins on the lobes not repeatedly toothed? Go to number 5. And then number 5, are the edges of the leaves not toothed? The lobes come to a droopy point. Then you know that it's a black maple. So most tree guides are going to be in this setup. Sometimes they're not, but it just really depends on the guide. The one I'm going to show you just kind of like asked you a bunch of questions, and it kind of really helps you determine what tree you're looking at. But you can also download the app, and I think the app might be what most of you guys are going to choose to do, because I think you just take a picture and like it'll tell you the name of the species right away. So this is your protocol for the week. I like to call it protocol because it's directly instructions on what you need to do. And I think this kind of helps you a lot, guide you in the right direction. Again, remember, you have to read. The pages that you have to be concerned about this week are pages 39 through 62 on the online e-text. Particularly pay attention to questions 39 and 21 so you can do your pre-lab. Read the instructions on page 57 for the lab 3. There's 2 parts again, part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is just like your animal diversity lab, where you're looking at a map and you're looking at pictures and you're basically just identifying the name of the tree or of the plant based on the pictures. Now for this laboratory activity, they're going to give you more than 2 pictures. Just to give you, sometimes they might give you like 3 pictures just to like help you, give you that extra little help so that you know which kind of tree you're looking at. And again, you're going to use the grid map and pictures to identify the questions. Each picture has a number to go with it on each point on the map, and you're going to use those to answer the questions. You're going to complete part 2. This is your AHA for the week. If there's a tree that you have been looking at for a really long time outside your home and you don't know what it is, this is your opportunity to find out. I had a lot of students who kind of enjoy this activity because they have been wondering, what kind of tree is that? I've been looking at it all my life and I never knew the name. Again, when you submit part 2, go ahead and submit the pictures as a separate attachment. We are not dealing with none of that IT nonsense where it doesn't show up on my end. Nah, none of that. You're just going to attach it as a separate attachment when you submit it. So again, you're going to use the laboratory 3 materials on Blackboard to help you identify the species. Identify the species name using online field guides. I'm not providing any, so you either have to use the application or you have to find your own field guide. I'm going to provide you with one online field guide that you can use, and that's it. Complete the lab 3, and this should say part 1, but you can clearly see on your manual which part is which, but it's part 1, and then you're going to complete part 2. And again, this is your at-home activity. All right, so this is the grid map for the tree lab. It looks exactly like your map. I added an additional grid map, and this is for question 5. And this map will help you answer question number 5. Some trees, some plants, again, come with more than 2 pictures. Sometimes, sometimes it's just 2, but it can be 3, depending on how much information the person who went on this hike wants to give you. So it says 2 images per tree, but there can be more. I think like one of them has like 3. So just make sure that you keep an eye out for that. Don't get confused. If there's an extra picture, it's just to help you better identify this tree. The at-home activity, go outside, take pictures of trees you don't recognize. They can be trees from your backyard or your neighborhood. Pay attention to the bark, the leaves, the shape, the arrangement of the leaf on the stem, the overall shape of the tree so that you can identify it. If you want to bring a family member so that they can leave the quarantine for a little bit, bring them along. Do they have any fruit? Is the bark smooth or rough? Make sure that you ask yourself all of these questions, because when you go back to the internet and try and identify which tree is the one you're looking at, you want to make sure that you have all this information. Complete your at-home activity. It's a total of 5 trees for a total of 5 points, but you also there's like 1 question on that at-home activity, so make sure you answer that question. You want to get credit for that, because if you don't answer that question, I may deduct points. So make sure that you complete the whole part, the whole activity, including the question. And so I'm going to show you what I did so you know what to do. So this is a yellowwood tree. I went on a walk and I was like, this tree looks kind of fun. And it doesn't look like a sycamore tree. It doesn't have any of the shapes of the sycamore tree. Remember, the sycamore tree had more of a serrated leaf, and it had all these lobes. This one only has 1. It had this tree also only has a flower that kind of blooms in the spring. The bark is also nothing like the sycamore tree. It's super smooth, and it's really short in comparison to a sycamore tree. They have an alternate compound leaf pattern, and you can I used this tree guide to be able to identify this tree, so that can tell you right away. You can use this if you want to help you identify the trees you're looking for. I really like this guide because it's like, does your tree have this kind of arrangement? Is the bark smooth or soft? It's really specific, and more than likely you're going to get the right answer. So just make sure that you notice all these different facts. This is another example. This was really easy to identify because this tree it's kind of it's very unique. Especially when I found this tree, I was teaching the summer lab, so it's very eye-catching to find a tree that looks like a fall tree per se. Like the leaves all look red, and it's like a bright red tree surrounded by greenery. So it's really pretty. This is a Japanese bloodgood maple tree. The bark is super smooth. They have these leaves that are red in color. And they also have samara fruit, and most maple trees can have this type of fruit that kind of just blooms and ripens in early autumn. So the leaves are deeply lobed and they're reddish in colored. So you can quickly identify which tree you're looking at because it's very unique. Doesn't look like any other tree. And this is the application I keep rambling about. Download this on your phone. If you just take a picture of it, boom, like it'll tell you like what kind of species you're looking at. So go ahead and use this. I don't mind it. Just make sure that you write it on the activity that this is what you did. That's fine. And yay, we got to the end of the lecture. Make sure that you do the lecture quiz 3 by Tuesday at 9 p.m. The regular schmegular schedule of the week. Do your pre-lab and do your data sheets. Alrighty guys, this is it. I kept it underneath 1 hour. I'm so excited. And I will see you next time.